Hello, BookTube. It's Bookshop Day, as you'll know if you've been following your feed on Instagram or on Twitter or on watching YouTube videos, because you'll have watched all the British booktubers cavorting during this bookish day of all days. They're the envy of BookTube anyway, but on today it seems like they're all hanging out together, and they all have those cute Books Are My Bag tote bags and whatnot, and Books Are My Bag swag of all kinds. I don't know if anything like that exists in this country, but no one's bothered to share it with me. But anyway, the day is for going to your local independent bookstore. I guess you're supposed to just scorn chain bookstores. I don't know why that would be. I worked in a chain bookstore for a quarter of a century and was surrounded by bookish people the whole time on my side of the counter and the other side of the counter, so I'm not sure that the book industry is healthy enough to disregard that, but one way or another, as elitist as it might seem, you're supposed to go to your local independent bookshop and show them some love, buy some books, that sort of thing, and be visible about it on social media. And I know that I'm supposed to join in. I mean, I love books as much as anybody. But the idea of going to a bookshop and simply forking over cover price for a book. I've been getting free books in the mail for 50 years. And at Barnes & Noble, I have a lifetime employee discount. And there's the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, a used bookstore that's full of gems and wonders, but not, where you can fill your shoulder bag with books and still not spend even half of what you would spend on one book at an independent bookstore. So, although I was supposed to go to my favorite independent bookstore, I'm not even sure what that would be in Boston. I'm not 100% sure I know what that would be. Maybe Trident Bookseller Cafe. But one way or another, although I was supposed to do that, I did not. Instead, I got a large pile of books today. But I managed to avoid going to a independent bookstore, almost as if stubbornly. It wasn't really stubborn, but I wanted to show you what I got. Starting with the aforementioned Brattle Bookshop. Those of you who might be new to the channel, it's a used bookstore here in Boston. It's old. It's wonderful. It's a 3-story bookstore in an old brick building with everything set up by alphabetical by author inside certain genres, and the prices are all reasonable, and the staff is really helpful, and the aisles are really inviting. And that would be reason enough to sing the praises of the Brattle, but in addition, they have a sale lot directly next to the store, which is absolutely full of bargain books, $1, $3, and $5 bargain books. They're not organized in any way, and they're just on every subject under the sun. And you never know what you're going to find out there, which is why I try never to push the karma at all. I just go with a wide open mind and see what the Brattle carts are going to offer me. Like, for instance, today, had I been one to bully the karma, I was in the mood to find an armload of great big fat biographies, and you can't do that. You can't do that. You'll be disappointed and you'll jinx your whole trip. So I made sure to tamp that down quite a bit. I found a bunch of great stuff. Like this one. This is relatively brand new. I think this came out this was 2005. So this came out right before I returned to regular book reviewing. So right before I would have been able to request this from Houghton Mifflin. So I was happy to find it, especially since it's in brand new condition. This is The Singing Life of Birds by Donald Kreutzma. And it's all about why birds sing, when they sing, to whom they sing, about what they sing. And it has a CD in the back. And this is, because it's the Brattle, this is obviously went from somebody's unwanted Christmas pile to a box, to their basement, to the Brattle, to the sale carts without ever anyone bothering to even look for the CD, much less rip it open. And I have a few MacBooks here that are old enough to play a CD, so that'll be fun in its own right. But this is also, I have read a lot about this book, but I have never actually read it. I've read enough about it to know that it is kind of the popular audience, popular science final word on birdsong. So I was overjoyed to have it, especially with the CD. I don't know why that means so much to me, but what else have we got here? Oh, yes, okay. The other day I was at the Brattle and encountered a sweet old biography. You'll remember from my last Brattle trip. And the thing I've noticed about the Brattle, the thing I've mentioned about the Brattle before, is that it's not pushing the karma, but if you see a subject at the Brattle and more than one book on that subject, probably that means that somebody did some collecting on a subject before they sold their books to the Brattle. So that if you see one book on a subject, you'll probably see others on the same subject. Right now, at the Brattle, I pointed out there was at the beginning of summer, an enormous raft of gardening books. There's also an enormous pile of Robert Graves biographies for some unknown reason. And I found this today. This is Catherine Duncan Jones. I think this might be her first book. This is her biography of Philip Sidney. Much more modern than the older one that I found recently. Much more up to date on its sources and, you know, the historiography and whatnot. And a terrific reading experience. This Catherine Duncan Jones is a really good writer, and I don't have this book. Didn't have it. I had it on the biography shelf for quite some time, but not recently. And then, what have we got here? What have we got here? Oh, yes, okay. I found this historical novel, I, Virgil, by David Wishart, who did, he's famous for his series of murder mysteries starring Falco, a Roman gumshoe noir-type character named Falco, who, those books, the Falco stories, are fantastic. They are fantastic. They are totally anachronistic. Falco talks like something out of Dashiell Hammett, but the Rome they convey is perfectly well researched, and they are electric. You just can't stop reading. And this is David Wishart's Roman historical novel that is not a Falco novel. This is just Virgil, the Roman poet Virgil, telling his story. And it's also the only David Wishart novel that I haven't read. So I was overjoyed to find it, just overjoyed. And then sticking close to Roman history, in fact, sticking close to someone who knew Virgil, this is the Copley translation of The Nature of Things, De Rerum Natura, by Lucretius. This is an ancient Roman poem that I don't particularly like, but I often wonder when I think that if maybe I don't like how it has been over-venerated, and maybe I would like it just fine on its own. So when I saw this, I took it as sort of the fates of the Brattle cart saying, you know, you really like this translation, so take it and give it a try and see. So I will do that. And then this next one, also a reread, but I keep waiting for a really, really good paperback set of these books. Maybe there is one in UK trade paperbacks that maybe I just need to look on Book Outlet for it. But this is James Morris. This is Pax Britannica. And this is the centerpiece volume of his trilogy, his Pax Britannica trilogy. Starts off with At Heaven's Command, then Pax Britannica, and then Farewell to Trumpets. And it's a 3-volume sort of grand tour of the Victorian era. And it is magnificently good. Just magnificently good. Incredibly readable and atmospheric. The personality traits, the grasp of the sweep of everything and the countries and the trends. Just, I love it. Absolutely love it. Wouldn't call it scholarly history, but I wouldn't do without it either. And I am currently doing without it. When I saw this, I realized I don't have any of the volumes. And the main reason is that these Harcourt Brace Jovanovic paperbacks, which is the form you usually see them in here in America, are very stiff. Unaccountably so. And so it's difficult to read this series without... I had the trade paperbacks. All 3 trade paperbacks, probably 15 years ago, and decided one year to reread the whole set. And one by one, as I went through the volumes, they fell apart. So that by the time I got to the end, the Victorian era was completely over. It was just a pile of pages and some old, stiff glue. I keep waiting for this to come back alive, so to speak, in some other version. I'll check Book Depository and see if maybe there's UK trade paperbacks that are later. But boy, oh boy, if you like the Victorian era and you haven't read this trilogy, you really need to. They are amazingly good. Then this is a little edited volume. This is Rereadings by Anne Fadiman, who did Ex Libris. She's done all of her little books look the same. They're all on books. They're all on reading. And this is not her alone. This is a collection of essays where authors are commissioned to talk about books they loved and books they've reread. And I loved it. I love all these little books of hers, and I, for some reason, didn't have this. So the minute I saw it, I thought, oh, you need that. Especially since I love rereading. And speaking of rereading, Michael Innes, this is Hamlet Revenge This is one of his Appleby murder mysteries. He had an incredibly prolific reading career. I did a lot of reinforcing on some of these books. They were in pretty rough shape when I got them back here. But he had an incredibly prolific literary career, wrote all kinds of things under his own name and under pseudonyms, including a string of murder mysteries. And this is my favorite by far. In fact, it doesn't bear any comparison to his other murder mysteries. It's so much better than they are. As soon as I saw, and again, I've had mass markets of this, I've had other trade papers of this, and they are so poorly made that they fall apart. I've reinforced this one. I'll hope to get in a read or two from it over the years before it falls apart. But what I'd really like to find is the dust jacketed hardcover. But who knows? Those are probably, for all I know, they're intensely collectible. Then I want to finish up this Brattle with this Brattle haul here with 3 gems, 3 older books that are exactly the kind of thing you find at the Brattle, at the bargain carts outside, inside too. But at the bargain carts outside, you don't know what you're going to find. You might think, it's the outdoor carts of a used bookstore, so it'll be all waterlogged Tom Clancy, but not at the Brattle. The Brattle, you can find anything, and it doesn't matter how new it is, how old it is, everything is mixed in out there. Which makes it such a joy to go rooting through everything if you have the time. If you're not pressed for time and you don't have to just skim, you can root through. You can get down into a squat and study the shelves so that you don't miss any gems. And I found 3 such gems. I had to reinforce them all, but oh boy. The first one is one that we have seen on this channel before. I have praised it enormously. It's this. It's The House on Nauset Marsh. By Dr. Wyman Richardson. This has illustrations by Henry Bugby Kane. Let me see. Every time I've just found recently a trade paperback of this volume, but let me see if I can find. It's got decal edges, so it's hard to just skim through it. But let me see if I can find a nice big picture. This is Dr. Richardson's book on Cape Cod, and on a Cape Cod that no longer exists. A Cape Cod from over a century ago. That was real country living. No one associates country living with Cape Cod these days. But once upon a time, in fact, in living memory, I remember this Cape Cod. You got away from the ports of the Cape and inland, and you were really on your own. It was a very rough kind of living, very wonderful beach living. There's a little shore bird. Let me see if I can find a full page illustration here. And these were serialized in the Atlantic Monthly, and they were incredibly popular. They gave all sorts of there's fishing in the fog. They gave all sorts of city people who had never really experienced that particular Cape Cod. They might have gone vacationing on the Cape, but they never got the real Cape experience. And this gave them that experience, sort of vicariously, and is just wonderful. It's just every little chapter is its own thing, but also interconnected in just how wonderful it is. And I think I've read this before, but I'm going to indulge myself and read this again. This is how the book sends off the reader at the end of all these adventures. And there are do-nothing days, there are fishing days, there's bad weather, there's good weather, there's fixing food, all sorts of stuff that you do when you're in an old, unweatherized house on the Cape for the whole summer. And it ends with a little chapter called Bedtime. The day is done. The supper things have all been washed and put away. The kerosene lamp on the dining table gives off a soft yellow glow that highlights the geese on the walls and leaves deep shadows on the corners. In the fireplace, an oak fire is quietly burning, which, together with the lamp, radiates enough heat to keep the low-ceilinged living room reasonably warm. We sit by the fire and talk tonight about nothing very serious. We feel comfortably tired after our exertions of the day, comfortably fed and comfortably warm. The mantel clock ticks quietly on and suddenly strikes 10 in its characteristically erratic way. First one person and then another yawns and stretches and departs for bed until at last only the old man himself is left. Finally, even he gets up from his chair, takes his last weather observation, checks up on the kitchen stove, and puts out the lamps. Being the last to go, he can enjoy the luxury of leisurely undressing before the warmth of the dying fire. By slowly turning around and around, he thoroughly toasts himself. At last, however, he can procrastinate no longer. He puts on the fire screen, dashes rapidly into his bedroom, and takes the desperate plunge between ice-cold sheets. Through the open living room door, he can see dancing lights and shadows, and hear quiet sounds as the fire burns down. From the pantry comes a barely audible scratching, indicating that the pantry mouse is busily engaged in finding himself some supper. Outside, there is a slight rustling as the light breeze stirs the cedars, while the sudden barking of a dog suggests that Mr. Fox is bothering someone's chickens. Rest now, little farmhouse. Your flock is safely in bed and sound asleep. Thank you for the wonderfully good times you have given us. Good night. That's a bygone time. Some of you, maybe, will know what this author is talking about, as I do so intimately. That little routine where you soak up the last heat from the fire before you dive into bed, before you go into the cold of the outer rooms. Every part of this book is just as charming as that, and so I always snap it up when I find it. This next one is equally charming. This is by Ernest Baynes, and it's called The Sprite. And it's the story of a red fox. He and his friends raided a fox den, basically, and he reached his hand down in, felt around for little fur bundles, and found a little fox puppy, and took the puppy home. And it turned out that the puppy was extremely adaptable to humans, not the slightest bit of wildness whatsoever. He named the fox the Sprite, and lived with the animal. The Sprite came and went. This is from the 1930s, I think. This is from the 1930s. I think this is before World War II. 1934. The fox came and went, but followed them everywhere, loved spending time with them, ate, slept at the foot of Baynes' bed quite often. And this is the story of that relationship. And I haven't read this since I borrowed a copy from look what's in here. Oh my. That used to work. In terms of delivering mail, that used to work. Oh my. December 1940. What is in here? Dear Corian, how stupid of me. Of course Marianne doesn't want Patty's battered old book, so here's the fresh copy for her, with hopes that she loves The Sprite too. 1940. Oh my. Okay. All right. Well, that is a perfect example of the kind of treasures that you find inside books at the Brattle. But I want to read you a bit from this too. I just to strain your patience. This is the very beginning of Baynes' book about the Sprite. Baynes wrote. He was an odd person, deeply lovable, and he wrote about nature a lot. But this animal always held a special place in him, in his heart. And it's the book starts off this way. It was a glorious autumn afternoon, and a red fox moved like a living flame in a field afire with goldenrod. From where I lay, field glass in hand, behind a warm, grassy knoll, I could see not only what he was doing, but every expression of his interesting face. He was hunting for small game, with a skill born of keen observation and long practice. Of what went on about him there was little that escaped his attention, and he seemed to know the meaning of all he saw and heard. To every sight and sound, to every stirring of the grass, his mobile body responded in a manner that denoted understanding. That rustling was made by the wind, he seemed to say to himself, as one black-tipped ear shot forward. That, of course, was an earthworm, as the other ear inclined ever so slightly towards the ground. But that, he cocked his head sharply on one side, ears forward and nose pointing to a clump of grass, was a mouse. And, as if to prove it, the lithe body would rise in a graceful arc and come down with the forepaws on the very spot his nose had been pointing at. Of course he was right. He knew it before he jumped just as well as when he wedged his sharp muzzle between slowly spreading paws and gobbled up the luckless rodent with as little ceremony as one might swallow an oyster. I watched him for some time, and then by drawing the air through my teeth I made a sound resembling rather closely the squeaking of a mouse. The fox stopped hunting, turned squarely in my direction and gave his whole attention to the new sound. I squeaked again, and he crouched swiftly and poured himself along the ground towards my hiding place. 10 yards away he stopped to get his bearings. I made the sound once more, but very faintly, for he was near and might detect the fraud. A sudden rush, and the very king of foxes stood before me, so near that almost I could have touched him. His unfeigned astonishment at seeing me was laughable. In another instant he would have withdrawn, slowly and with dignity perhaps, to race away at full speed the moment he thought himself out of sight behind the knoll. But he hesitated, and a look of recognition came into his eyes. "Hello, boy," I laughed. "Don't you know me?" His big brush began to move slowly from side to side. A joyous smile replaced the look of surprise, and with a sobbing yelp he threw himself into my arms. It was my tame fox, the Sprite, the animal I love best in all the world. And the book is full of just delightful encounters like that, and also vintage black and white photos. There is the Sprite sound asleep in a shoe as a tiny little puppy. I was so happy to find this. Of course, I'll buy any book by this author that I find, and I'm only ever going to find them at the Brattle, at a place like the Brattle, and there aren't many places like the Brattle anymore. So I was very happy to find this. It will go on the shelf with a few other books of him that I have. And then the last one is oversized. I'm very chary about oversized books because they look great, they entice, but then you end up getting rid of them. But this one is one I think I'm going to be keeping. This is The Night Watchers, an oversized book about owls, with full-page illustrations, all in this lovely black and white. Look at that. All about the different kinds of owls. It's written by Angus Cameron and drawn by Peter Parnell. Angus Cameron was a editor in New York forever and ever and ever, but this was a long time ago. This is a generation ago at least. What have we got? 1971. Yeah, so these Peter Parnell might still be alive, but I'm pretty sure that Angus Cameron is not. But this is their love letter to owls. Really, you get a bit of natural history, but also lots and lots of folklore and field observations, personal observations, that sort of thing. It's if you like books on owls, it's one to have. And the minute I saw it, I thought, well, it's oversized. Are you sure you want it? And then I thought, this is never going to be reprinted. No one's ever going to bring this back into print. No one's ever going to make a new edition of this, even in a normal size book. So if you don't grab this when you see it, you'll never see it. You'll never get to experience it when you want to. So there you have it. That was my Brattle trip for today. That was, I'll do a little Steve Pyramid here. That was The Night Watchers, Sir Philip Sidney, The Sprite, which was on my mind anyway because I just read, what is it, this thing here, I Am Not a Fox, a kid's book that comes out later this month about an animal who is clearly a fox, but who has all sorts of problems fitting in with either dogs or foxes. Utterly touching, utterly heartwarming. So I was ready for a book about foxes anyway. And The House at Nauset Marsh, Hamlet Revenge, rereadings edited by Anne Fadiman, Pax Britannica by James Morris, really hoping that, according to the karma of the sale carts, I'm really hoping this means the other 2 volumes in this are coming and will crop up at the Brattle, because I would like all 3, even if they're somewhat stiff and hard to read. I would still like to have this set rather than not have it. Then The Nature of Things, De Rerum Natura, by the writer going under the name of Lucretius. And I, Virgil, by David Wishart, whose Falco books I strongly recommend. And another book on nature, The Singing of Birds. All about, and with a CD still in the packet. How wonderful is that? So that was my trip to the Brattle, and I left with a bag load of books, and I was feeling really great about that, but I was feeling a little bad that I wasn't doing Bookshop Day, even though that was kind of my intent when I left the house. I was kind of wanted to show my support. And then, as I was coming back home, I realized that today is the day for the Boston Public Library book sale. It had somehow slipped my mind completely, so I did not have a game plan. I did not get there early. I did not have muscular teenagers to carry stuff for me. I was not planned in any way. I just was going right by the library, so I went in. I went up to the Cushman room, which was crammed full of people, just because I like to support the Friends of the Library. So I went and I got a bunch of books. I got as many books as I could comfortably carry added to the books I already had. And they're all of a type, which is the fun of a library book sale. There are these things. Let me see if I can... well, you'll recognize them, I'm sure. Year's Best Fantasy and Horror by Ellen Datlow and Terry Wendling, with cover art by Thomas Canty. They all have this great Thomas Canty cover art. So I got just year after year after year of them, as many as they had, because I let a lot of these volumes go without paying any attention to them. And I did that for an unworthy reason, a wrong reason. I did that. Look at that. These Canty covers are just so beautiful. I got just a whole set of them at the Boston Public Library. And the reason that I tended to sometimes ignore them when they were coming out originally is because I've never read any horror that really did anything for me. But there's still tons of fantasy in all of these things, and the horror stories might work on me now in a way that they didn't before. I might appreciate more things. I'd like to hope that I'm a more appreciative reader with every passing year. I'd like to hope that. When I found there's just a bonanza of all these things, I just grabbed them all. So the long and the short of it is that I had a wonderful bookshop day, but I had an incorrect bookshop day. I did not actually go to an independent bookstore anywhere in Boston. There aren't many. There are probably 2 in Boston. I didn't go to one. I didn't show it any love. I didn't spend any money. And when I got this week's Entertainment Weekly, which has Sam Heughan on the cover from Outlander, I was already... I read a feature earlier about the new season of Outlander, so I was rereading the first book, and I suddenly realized the first book has a cover from the TV show, and so I know does the 4th book. But I think now all of the Outlander books, all of the first 4, have beautifully done, high definition, attractive TV show adaptation covers, and I want them all. So there is actually a small group of new books that I could have bought at an indie bookshop. But even if I'd passed one, I would have balked because I can get those same things at Barnes & Noble with my employee discount for much less. So my bookshop day was a failure in terms of doing what bookshop day is supposed to do. But I did go to shops that sell books. And I expressed my bookish love that way. I'd like to think that gets me a small pass, but maybe not. Well, I'll do Bookshop Day better next year, somehow. But anyway, I want to wrap this up. That was just a huge bookish blast for you. But I'll wrap this up, and I will see you shortly. Thank you, BookTube.